Both of my children were born on the anniversary of Roe versus Wade. The first child was completely unplanned, surprise, and the second child was born about a month premature. Now, of all the people in the world, what are the chances that pro-life Andrew's children would be born several years apart on the exact same date, the anniversary of Roe versus Wade? Isn't that weird? In a previous video, I mentioned this and several people said that they wanted to hear the story, so here it is. Several years ago, before the birth of my first child, we were living in downtown Manila, Philippines, and at the time, an evangelist working for Amazing Facts, a friend of mine, was passing through Manila, so we met up for lunch, and while eating lunch, he asked me if we were planning on having children, and I said no. I said I did not want to have any children, and I told him several reasons why. My wife, however, she did want children, but I was trying to convince her to just wait for a while with the hope that I could stretch a while to mean indefinitely, and so far I had succeeded. Well, this evangelist from Amazing Facts happened to agree with my reasons, and he opened the Bible and he read the verse from Matthew 24, "Woe to those who are pregnant and to those who are nursing babies in those days." He said, "Andrew, I think you've made a good decision." He also agreed and said he didn't think that now was a good time to have children. Well, after lunch, I went back to my apartment and opened the door, walked in, where I was met by my wife, who had a shocked look on her face and greeted me with the words, "Honey, look at this, I'm pregnant," and showed me the positive results from a pregnancy test, to which I immediately replied, "No, that cannot be true. Those things are often wrong. Please try again." So she tried again with the same result. She was in fact pregnant. Now, this was an odd moment in my life because I was just so sure that I was never going to have children. The evangelist from Amazing Facts, he was staying at a nearby hotel waiting to catch his plane the next day. So I called him early in the morning and I went to meet him and told him what had happened. I wish I had a picture of the look of shock on his face. Just a few hours earlier, we were high-fiving each other, just so sure we had figured it out and that I was not going to have any children. And now everything that I thought would not happen is now happening. Anyways, 9 months later, my first son was born, and at the time, I was completely oblivious to the date. About a year or so later, while I was already familiar with abortion history, about a year later, I happened to be looking at this news headline of the Supreme Court decision, and suddenly it just jumped out at me for the first time. January 22. This was the date that my son was born. At the time, I remember thinking how odd it was that of all people, I would have an unplanned pregnancy born on the anniversary of Roe. Also, as I've explained in another video, I'll explain it again. When my wife went into labor for our first child, I was at the hospital and the nurses asked me to put on a cap and gown, and when the baby was born, the nurses carried him out and let me hold him. You are looking at a picture of me holding my son just a few minutes after he was born. Now, this was one of the worst moments in my entire life. This was a nightmare. The moment I took my son in my arms, I was overwhelmed with feelings of shock and horror and rage. While my wife was pregnant, during the pregnancy, I had been learning about and studying abortion, and I had seen all those videos of abortions being performed, and now I'm holding in my hands this incredibly vulnerable, innocent, helpless little baby, and to know that my Seventh-day Adventist Church supports the violent murder of this helpless little child, it was just horrifying beyond description. Now, I've been angry before, we've all been angry before at different things, but at that moment, I became angry in a manner I've never felt before. I could feel this huge, all-encompassing sense of awful rage and fury. I experienced such fury and rage I cannot even begin to describe. Suddenly, abortion was no longer some idea or concept that you read or talk about. It was not some issue to be discussed in a conversation. Abortion became real to me. This is a real little human child. It is crying. It is helpless. It is entirely dependent upon our help, our nurture, our love, and protection. And to violate all of this and deliberately beat this baby to death and rip it to pieces, I looked at his little face and I imagined those steel pliers crushing his face. It was just a terrible wave of horror. My church has Adventist hospitals that have actually murdered tens of thousands of little babies just like this. Our institutions openly honor and celebrate people who murder children. I began to tremble with rage. I could not smile. I don't know what the nurse saw, but whatever she saw, she asked me if I was all right, and she took the baby back to the mother. It was just too much for me. I was trembling and shaking, and I had to leave the hospital. It was an awful experience. Fast forward, we decided that if we have one child, we should have at least two, so my wife became pregnant again with a due date of February 15th, the day after Valentine's. And by the way, for those who don't know or who may be new to my videos, my wife is a licensed practicing OB/GYN physician. At the time, she was finishing her residency, so she was in the hospital 80 to 100 hours a week. Several times throughout the week when she was on duty, I had to go to the hospital and pull out a mattress and sleep on the floor of the doctor's lounge with the baby while my wife was in the delivery room or in the operating room delivering other babies. I was literally sleeping on the floor just about 15 feet from the delivery room. Thankfully, she finished residency during the second pregnancy, so we left the city of Manila and moved to a smaller city that had more rural surroundings. She was due February 15th, but during early January, I was just joking around and I said to her, "Wouldn't it be great if our next child was born on the same day as the first? That way we can have just one birthday party." My wife, however, did not think that was funny because that would be a premature birth. However, several weeks later, during the evening of January 21st, I don't remember, I think I was sitting down, I was reading a book or something, and suddenly I heard my wife say, "I'm starting to have contractions." So we got into the car and drove to the hospital. Another OB, who is a friend and who works with my wife, did the assessment and said we could not delay. That child was not going to wait for February 15th. He's coming out, and since the process could take several hours or even longer, and because my wife was an OB, they decided not to admit her, but let her go home and self-assess the situation. So we went home, and the next morning we had a birthday celebration for child number one. The cake was yummy, and then in the afternoon, she gave birth to child number two. So that's the story of how both of my children were born on the same date. And I do find it kind of weird or quite odd that of all the people that this could happen to, it happened to pro-life Andrew. So what are the chances of that? What could this possibly mean? I don't know. Thank you for watching.